Number 10. Tomb of the Red Queen. Sometime between 600 and 700 AD, a noblewoman was laid to rest in the ancient Mayan city of Palenque in what is now southern Mexico. She remained there undisturbed until archaeologist Fanny Lopez Jimenez found her remains in 1994. The discovery was made during some routine stabilization work on a staircase. Lopez Jimenez noticed a crack in the structure and peered inside using her flashlight. She was surprised when she saw what looked like a narrow passageway leading to a sealed door. Her team went inside and found 3 chambers. 2 were empty, but the third contained the noblewoman's tomb. On the steps leading up to the tomb were a brown ceramic plate and 2 orange ceramic vases, along with some human remains. Once inside, the researchers carefully pried the sarcophagus open. One of the first things they noticed was that the woman and her grave goods were covered with bright red cinnabar powder, earning her the nickname of the Red Queen. In addition to the Red Queen's sarcophagus, the undecorated chamber contained the skeleton of an 11-year-old boy. Experts believe that the boy was one of the Red Queen's servants, and that he was sacrificed upon her death so he could accompany her into the Mayan underworld Xibalba, or Place of Fear. Number 9. Children's Cemetery. Earlier this year, archaeologists working in north-central Poland discovered dozens of medieval skeletons in what's become known as the region's oldest Christian cemetery. Located in the village of Starorypin Prywatna, the nearly 1,000-year-old burials consist of children who died between the ages of 2 and 5 years old. They were laid to rest shortly after Poland adopted Christianity in 966 AD. The middle-aged graves were found during routine excavations that were being performed ahead of agricultural work on the property. Altogether, over 30 burials were unearthed. Experts initially believed that the cemetery dated back to the 12th century, but they have since determined that it's slightly older. Based on a physical and chemical analysis of the bones, the graveyard originated as early as the mid-11th century, according to lead archaeologist Dr. Jadwiga Lewandowska. Most of the individuals were buried on their backs with their heads facing west. Metal crosses found throughout the site identify the graves as Christian. In addition to the child burials, archaeologists found the remains of men between 40 and 45 years old, as well as women who were 25 to 30 years old when they died. The deceased were similar in appearance, indicating that they may have been related. Everyone had bad teeth, likely due to their poor diet, which included heavily contaminated flour. The remains are undergoing DNA analysis in hopes that researchers can learn more about the cemetery's occupants. Number 8. Castration Lamps. Followers of the Greek fertility goddess Cybele consisted mainly of eunuch priests who marked their devotion to the deity through self-castration. Yikes. They got the job done using an elaborately decorated set of castration clamps with serrated edges. Double yikes. One set, discovered in the Thames River during the 1840s, shows just how fancy these devices were. The clamps are adorned with the heads of the gods and goddesses who presided over the 8-day Roman week, as well as a bull's head and a lion's head. They likely date back to the 2nd or 3rd century and were probably made in Rome or elsewhere in Italy, according to archaeology blogger Roger Pierce. Without going into too much detail, castration clamps were used to prevent blood loss during the gory procedure. Self-castration was practiced until sometime during the 4th century, when authorities began punishing people for it amid the rise of Christianity. In all fairness, there are arguably safer ways to worship the god of one's choice. Number 7. Beheaded Nobleman's Ring. The Isle of Man is a small island situated between Ireland and Great Britain. While searching for treasure there last year, metal detectorist Lee Morgan found a 370-year-old gold and crystal ring with an inscription bearing the letters JD or ID. Dating back to the late 17th century, during the Stuart period, the slender ring may have been crafted in honor of an earl who died during the English Civil War. If the inscription's letters are JD, it probably belonged to James Stanley, who signed his name as James Derby, hence the initials. He held the high-ranking titles of the 7th Earl of Derby and the Lord of Man. The ring's high quality indicates that it was created for a wealthy person, according to Alison Fox, a curator at Manx National Heritage. She believes that Stanley's widow may have had the piece made in her late husband's memory. Also known as Baron Strange and the Great Earl of Derby, Stanley was a royalist who supported the authoritarian monarch King Charles I, who ruled over England, Scotland, and Ireland from 1625 to 1649. The king's tyrannical ways did not vibe well with English Parliament, and in 1642, tensions between the two parties erupted into civil war. Charles I's reign ended with his execution. Stanley was beheaded 2 years later in 1651 in the town of Bolton in Manchester, England. Many people search for treasure in the UK, but it's rare to actually find it, making for a surprising discovery. And while the ring itself may not be creepy at first glance, knowing that it may commemorate a decapitated nobleman certainly adds eerie overtones to the artifact. Number 6. Herta Settlement. Herta is the largest of 4 islands that make up the St. Kilda archipelago of the Outer Hebrides Islands. Located 112 miles from the Scottish coastline, the rugged, remote island is made up of the remnants of a dormant volcano. There's just one access point to Herta, and reaching it requires a long, 18-hour journey by sea from the Scottish mainland. Boats often have to turn back due to turbulent seas, making the island largely inaccessible throughout the year. Despite its wildly inconvenient location, Herta was continuously inhabited for over 2,000 years, from prehistoric times until the last resident left in 1930. Archaeological evidence shows that there was a Viking settlement there, as well as 3 chapels and a dry stone hut called a clyde where people stored and dried meat. Survival was difficult on Herta. The island began welcoming visitors during the 19th century and became dependent on the tourism industry. When the Scottish potato famine hit, its residents became even more destitute. In 1850, the Australian government sponsored an immigration program to offer the people of Herta a better life. Nearly 50 people took advantage of the opportunity. In the following years, the island's remaining residents petitioned the Scottish government for help resettling on the mainland. They were facing one challenge after the other, including disease brought by tourists, an increase in infant mortality, and the establishment of a World War I base on their land. The last 36 people living on Herta left in 1930. Since then, there have not been any permanent residents. Seabirds have reclaimed the island as their breeding ground, and the decrepit homes, schoolhouse, and other structures remain empty, falling further into disrepair as time passes. Number 5. Backyard Burials. While digging a drainage hole for a patio in the English village of Heytesbury earlier this year, a work crew stumbled upon some bones. They initially thought they'd found animal remains, but when they dug deeper, they unearthed a human skull. The team immediately stopped working and notified the property owner of the gruesome discovery. Police dispatched a crime scene crew, which included forensic officers and an archaeologist. Speaking with the Mirror, property owner Matthew Jackson reported that the experts had determined that the skeletons were not recent. In fact, the remains are thought to date back to the 5th century during the early medieval period. Found just 300 feet from the 12th century St. Peter and Paul Church, the bones are probably from one of the many plague pits that are rumored to exist within the town, according to local historian Joe Charlesworth. The graves appear to be Christian and contain the remains of both men and women of varying ages. The bones were sent away for more testing to determine their age and will be respectfully reburied. Number 4. Ancient clay head and skull. Between 900 BC and 200 AD, A collection of mysterious, ancient nomadic warrior cultures known as the Scythians wandered the Eurasian steppe, ravaging their enemies along the way. Researchers admittedly know very little about these tribes, but they have established, based on the evidence left behind, that the Scythians engaged in strange and macabre death rituals. In 1968, archaeologists discovered a creepy clay head inside an ancient Scythian burial in the mountains of southern Siberia. The strange artifact is estimated to be around 2,100 years old. It was found among the charred remains of somewhere between 13 and 15 people. At first, researchers thought the skull was human, but they began to suspect otherwise based on its shape. X-ray imaging ultimately revealed that the clay head contained the skull of a ram. The item was found at a burial ground that experts believe belonged to the Tagarska culture, one of the better studied Scythian tribes. They hailed it as an exceptional discovery, despite having found other fascinating objects in Scythian burials, including weapons and gold jewelry. Experts are unsure what role the ram played in the Scythians' funerary rituals, but they've proposed some theories. Noting that rams were highly regarded by the region's ancient cultures, Russian archaeologist Natalia Polosmak suggested that it may have represented the soul and missing body of a man who drowned, became lost, or otherwise disappeared. But the plain and simple truth is that researchers don't know the story behind the strange artifact, and they may never figure it out. For now, all they can do is speculate. Number 3. Black Death. Located in Hertfordshire, England, the Church of St. Mary the Virgin is large but modest, and perhaps even pleasant at first glance. But the 14th century structure contains evidence of the Black Death, one of the darkest chapters in European history. Medieval graffiti etched into the church's walls detail the suffering that England's residents endured during this tumultuous time. You probably wouldn't understand the carvings just by looking at them, but the stories behind them are nothing short of heartbreaking. One image, created sometime between 1340 and 1561, is thought to depict the old St. Paul's Cathedral, which burned down during the Great Fire of London. 14th century survivors of the Black Death added their own personal touch to the church's north wall writing. Quote, "Wretched, terrible, destructive year. The remnants of the people alone remain." End quote. The statement may not make sense to you, me, or most other people, but experts have identified it as a reference to the bubonic plague's first pestilence, which swept through England in 1348. It killed as much as 1/3 to 1/2 of London's population before finally dying out in September 1350. Reflecting on past disease breakouts hits especially close to home as the world grapples with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the tragedies that come along with it. Number 2. Serial Killer's Head. During the early 20th century, a killer named the Dusseldorf Vampire committed a series of murders in Dusseldorf, Germany. His real name was Peter Kürten, and he was finally caught in 1929 after killing a child. He confessed to at least 70 violent crimes, and he admitted that he enjoyed drinking his victims' blood, hence his nickname. On July 1, 1931, Kürten ate his last meal of Wiener Schnitzel, white wine, and fried potatoes. The next day, he was executed by way of the guillotine. Scientists wanted to better understand the deranged killer's mind. In an effort to learn more about what might drive someone to commit such heinous acts, they bisected and mummified Kürten's head. Much to their surprise, they found no abnormalities in the man's brain other than an enlarged thymus gland, which doesn't explain Kürten's behavior. His head ended up at the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, sometime after World War II, where it remains on display to this day. Number 1. Tooth tumors. In 2017, archaeologists discovered an ovarian tumor with teeth in it in a Gothic cemetery in Lisbon, Portugal. Found in a grave outside the church and convent of Carmo, the artifact belonged to the remains of a 45-year-old woman. The mass measures just 1.7 inches at its widest point, according to a study. It bears evidence of disorganized bone formation as well as 5 malformed teeth. Researchers believe that the calcified tumor dates back to sometime between the 15th century and 1755, when an earthquake destroyed the cemetery and the church. At first, they didn't know what the object was. They speculated that it was perhaps a fetus, or the remnants of an ectopic pregnancy. The team eventually determined that it was a type of cyst called a teratoma, which is actually quite common in today's world. Roughly 20% of all modern ovarian tumors are teratomas. They occur when germ cells multiply abnormally and form hair, teeth, bones, and other mature tissues. In many cases, teratomas are benign, but they sometimes become large, painful, and cancerous. It's unknown whether the teratoma played a role in the woman's death, but her skeleton seemed unaffected by it. This off-putting but important discovery is helping experts learn more about the history of these tumors. And it's just one example of archaeologists discovering teratomas. In 2013, a 1600-year-old teratoma was found with a woman's remains at the Roman necropolis in Spain. Much like the more recent case in Portugal, it's unknown whether the tumor was benign or if it perhaps contributed to the woman's death. Which of these discoveries creeped you out the most? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit subscribe and don't forget to watch more amazing videos from the channel.